The morning sunlight crept through the thin curtains of Margaret Williams's small, cozy kitchen. The golden rays touched the dust that floated gently in the air, giving the room a warm, almost sacred glow. Today was her 60th birthday, a milestone she had always imagined celebrating with laughter, candles, and her daughter by her side. But this morning the house was silent, no footsteps, no music, only the soft ticking of the old clock on the wall. Margaret tied her faded blue apron around her waist, the same one she'd worn for years while baking birthday cakes. First for her husband, then for her daughter, Emily. The apron was frayed at the edges, but she couldn't let it go. It carried too many memories, too many smiles. She opened her recipe book, the pages yellowed with age and stained with butter marks. Her finger traced a familiar line. Vanilla birthday cake with lemon frosting, Emily's favorite. A sad smile touched her lips. Let's make it perfect, she whispered to herself, as though speaking to someone who could hear. The kitchen soon filled with the comforting smell of vanilla and sugar. The radio played an old love song, one she and her husband used to dance to before he passed away 15 years ago. She hummed softly, pretending for a moment that everything was as it used to be, that laughter still lived in these walls, that Emily still called her mom in that cheerful, innocent voice. When the cake came out of the oven, golden and soft, Margaret placed it carefully on the counter. She made the frosting from scratch, just as her mother had taught her. Every swirl of the knife across the cake was filled with quiet love and unspoken hope. She set the table for two, her favorite white porcelain plate, silver cutlery, and a vase with one bright sunflower in it. The other chair remained empty, waiting. At noon, she brewed coffee, glancing at her phone on the counter. No message, no call. She must be busy, Margaret told herself. She'll call tonight. She always calls in the evening. But deep down, a faint ache began to grow in her chest, the kind that starts quietly, then spreads slowly until it feels like it's swallowing you whole. She walked to the living room where the walls were covered with framed photos of Emily. One showed her at 5 years old, her face covered in chocolate frosting. Another, her graduation with Margaret's proud arm wrapped around her. The pictures told stories of love, of a mother who gave everything, of a daughter who once couldn't spend a day without her. Now, even a simple happy birthday felt too much to ask. Afternoon turned into evening. The golden light outside faded into blue. Margaret sat on her couch, holding her phone like it was the last piece of connection she had. She refreshed her messages again and again, but the screen stayed blank. At 7 p.m., she finally gave up. She went back to the kitchen where the cake waited untouched. The frosting had begun to harden. The coffee was cold. She sat down, lit a single candle on the cake, and whispered softly, "Happy birthday, Margaret." Her voice cracked at her own name. The flame flickered, and she stared at it as though it carried all the memories of her life. Birthdays filled with laughter, the smell of candles, her daughter's laughter echoing through the house. A tear rolled down her wrinkled cheek, and then another. She didn't bother to wipe them away. She took one bite of the cake, but it tasted like nothing. The sweetness had faded. The air felt heavy, filled with silence and the ghost of forgotten love. She stood up and went to the window. Outside, the world continued. Cars passing, children playing, people laughing somewhere far away. The world hadn't paused for her birthday or her sadness. It struck her then how time can be cruel. It gives memories but takes away people. It leaves behind an echo of what once was. Margaret closed her eyes, holding the edge of the curtain tightly. "You'll remember someday," she murmured to the wind as if her daughter might somehow hear it across the miles. "You'll remember when it's too late." When the clock struck midnight, Margaret was still sitting at the table, her head resting on her folded arms. The candle had long burned out, leaving only a small puddle of wax on the white plate. In that small, quiet home, surrounded by photos of a life that once overflowed with love, a mother sat alone, her birthday forgotten by the one person she had lived her entire life for. But in her silence, something began to change. The pain was deep, yes, but somewhere beneath it, a flicker of strength began to rise. Not anger, not hatred, just a quiet realization. If she could forget me, I can learn to forget her too. The night swallowed her tears, and the moon watched quietly as Margaret made her first unspoken promise, one that would change everything. The morning after her lonely birthday was colder than usual. A soft drizzle tapped gently against the kitchen window, and the smell of yesterday's cake still lingered faintly in the air, sweet yet stale like a memory that refused to fade. Margaret sat at the small round table with a cup of black coffee that had gone cold hours ago. She hadn't slept well. Dreams of Emily as a child kept replaying in her mind. Her daughter's laughter as she helped her blow out candles. The way she would cling to her mother's arm and say, "You'll never be alone, Mommy." And now the silence around her was the only thing that kept her company. It was a silence so thick it almost had a voice, whispering reminders of everything she'd lost. The clock on the wall ticked slowly, each second stretching into eternity. Margaret finally rose from her chair and walked into the living room. The wooden floor creaked beneath her feet. The air was cool, heavy with stillness. Her eyes wandered across the framed photographs once again, the only witnesses of her life's journey. There she was, holding baby Emily in her arms, her smile bright and hopeful. Another picture showed the two of them at the park, feeding ducks by the pond. In one, Emily was 10, wearing a homemade dress that Margaret had stitched herself. Her hand trembled as she touched the glass of one frame. "You used to love that dress," she murmured. "You said I made you feel like a princess." Her voice cracked. It was strange how memories could hurt more than any wound. They looked beautiful, but inside them lived the sharp edge of loss, invisible but merciless. Margaret sank into the old sofa. It still smelled faintly of lavender and fabric softener, her husband's favorite scent. For a long moment, she closed her eyes and let herself drift back in time. She saw her husband, John, sitting beside her, laughing at some silly joke. His laughter had always filled the room strong and comforting. When he died, that sound disappeared, replaced by quiet sighs and the ticking clock that never stopped. After his death, she had poured all her love, all her energy into Emily. She worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, and gave up everything just to make sure her daughter never felt the emptiness she did. She thought love was enough to keep someone close forever. But now she knew. Sometimes love isn't enough to make someone stay. A sudden knock startled her. Her heart lifted for a second. Maybe it's her. But when she opened the door, it was only the mailman, holding a few envelopes and a small magazine. "Morning, Mrs. Williams," he said kindly. "Morning," she replied with a tired smile, her hope fading as quickly as it had risen. She sifted through the letters, bills, advertisements, a charity envelope, no birthday card, no message, not even a late apology. Margaret walked out to the porch. The drizzle had turned into a light rain, and the world smelled like wet earth and fallen leaves. She stood there for a moment, letting the rain touch her hands. Across the street, a family was laughing, children running around, their mother calling them back inside. The sound pierced her heart. She turned away. Back inside, she went to her bedroom and sat on the edge of her bed. The room was neat, almost too neat. Everything had its place. The folded blankets, the books on the nightstand, the small wooden cross above her bed. Order had become her comfort. When life fell apart, at least she could keep her space perfect. She opened her nightstand drawer and took out an old journal. Its pages were filled with letters she had written to Emily over the years. Letters she never sent. One by one, she read them. "I miss our Sunday breakfasts. I wish you'd visit more often. I'm proud of you, no matter what." Each line was soaked in tenderness and longing, and as she read, tears dripped onto the paper, smudging the ink that had already faded with time. "Why did you forget me, Emily?" she whispered to the empty room. Was I that easy to leave behind? Outside, the wind howled softly through the trees as if answering her. Hours passed. Evening came again, bringing that same hollow quietness. Margaret turned off the lights and sat by the window, watching the rain fall through the dim glow of the street lamps. For the first time, she realized how truly alone she was, not just physically, but in spirit. The house that once echoed with laughter and conversation was now filled with only the sound of her breathing. Yet somewhere deep inside, beneath the sorrow, something else began to take shape, a feeling she couldn't yet name. It was small, quiet, but steady. It wasn't anger, but it wasn't forgiveness either. It was resolve. She didn't know what to do with it yet, but she could feel it rising, like a faint heartbeat returning to life after years of silence. Maybe it was time, she thought, to stop waiting for the phone to ring. Maybe it was time to stop living in a house full of ghosts. That night, before going to bed, Margaret whispered a prayer, not for her daughter, not even for herself, but for courage. The courage to face the days ahead, no matter how empty they might be. As she closed her eyes, the wind outside carried the soft creak of her wind chime, a lonely sound, yes, but also a reminder that something still moved, still lived. The house was quiet, but for the first time, Margaret didn't feel completely broken. She felt the faint stir of something new, the beginning of letting go. And though she didn't know it yet, this silence, this ache, would soon awaken a strength she never knew she had. A week had passed since Margaret's lonely birthday, but the sadness still lingered like fog that refused to lift. The cake was gone, the decorations put away, but every corner of the house whispered reminders of that forgotten day. Margaret moved slowly through her morning routine. She made tea instead of coffee now. The bitterness of coffee reminded her too much of waiting. She sat by the window, knitting something aimlessly. Not because she needed it, but because silence demanded something to fill it. Outside, the autumn leaves had begun to turn golden. The world looked beautiful, yet she felt invisible within it. Life was moving on without her, and she didn't know how to move with it. As she folded some old clothes that afternoon, her hand brushed against a small wooden box tucked inside her drawer. Curious, she pulled it out. A thin layer of dust covered the lid. When she opened it, she froze. Inside lay a small velvet pouch and a folded note written in her own handwriting, for Emily, when she visits. Her throat tightened. She slowly took out the pouch and opened it. Inside was a delicate gold locket shaped like a heart. She remembered buying it nearly 6 years ago, the year Emily got her first big promotion. Margaret had been so proud. She wanted to surprise her daughter with something special, a symbol of love and memory. Inside the locket was a tiny picture of the two of them, taken on Emily's 18th birthday, both smiling, both unaware of how cruel time could be. But Emily had never visited that year. One postponement led to another. "Next month, Mom," she would say. Then months turned into years. Margaret held the locket in her hand, feeling its cold metal press into her skin. It was beautiful. A small piece of love frozen in time. She thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Maybe I'll send it to her," she murmured. "Maybe it'll remind her." The next morning, she wrapped the locket carefully in tissue paper and placed it in a small box. She wrote a short note. "For my dearest Emily, sometimes love doesn't need a special day to be remembered. Mom." She sealed the package and carried it to the post office. The young man behind the counter asked, "Any special delivery instructions, Mom?" Margaret smiled softly. "Just handle it with care," she said. As she left the post office, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this small gesture would bridge the growing distance between them. Maybe it would remind Emily that love still waited for her, patiently, faithfully. That evening, Margaret sat in her recliner and decided, for the first time in months, to check Emily's social media. She had been avoiding it. The pictures of a life too busy for her mother were often too painful to see. But tonight, she told herself, maybe she posted something about the birthday. Maybe I missed it. She opened the app, searched her daughter's name, and waited for the screen to load. The first image that appeared made her heart stop. There was Emily surrounded by friends, smiling brightly, holding a large birthday cake. The caption read, "Happy 3rd birthday to my baby Max. You're the best boy ever." Max was Emily's golden retriever. Margaret stared at the photo, her eyes blurring with tears. She scrolled through the comments, hearts, laughing emojis, people saying how lucky Max was. Not one mention of her. It's not even a simple "love you, Mom." Her breath hitched. She placed the phone down slowly as if it were made of glass. The room began to feel smaller, suffocating. The laughter from the photo seemed to echo in her head. Not real, but loud enough to drown her thoughts. So she remembered the dog, Margaret whispered, her voice trembling. "But not me. A bitter laugh escaped her lips, short, sharp, painful. She sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. The light outside faded, and shadows stretched across the room. The air grew cold, but she didn't move. Inside her, something quietly broke, not with a scream, not with tears, but with silence. Later that night, she lay awake in bed, the sound of rain tapping softly against the window. She thought about the years she had sacrificed, the extra shifts, the sleepless nights, the birthdays she made magical for her daughter. She had given Emily everything she had. And now she couldn't even give her a moment's thought. Her eyes drifted toward the small lamp beside her bed. Its warm light fell on the framed photo of the two of them. Margaret reached for it, tracing her daughter's smiling face with her trembling fingers. "I waited for you," she whispered. "I always waited." She didn't cry this time. The tears had run dry. What replaced them was something different, colder, sharper, a kind of peace that comes when pain burns itself out. The next morning, she received a notification on her phone. "Your package has been delivered." Margaret smiled faintly. She didn't expect a call, but a small part of her still hoped. The day passed quietly. Evening came, the night, no call, no thank you, no message. She looked out the window and saw the moon rising, pale and distant, like her daughter's love. "All right, then," she whispered softly, her voice steady now. "If you can forget me, I can learn to forget you." She stood by the window for a long time, watching the clouds drift across the sky. Somewhere deep inside, something had shifted. The longing was gone. The hope had turned into resolve. The locket, once a symbol of love, had become a symbol of goodbye. And though Emily didn't know it yet, that unopened gift marked the beginning of her mother's silent revenge. A quiet reawakening born not out of hate, but out of heartbreak. The following weeks passed like pages turning in a book Margaret no longer wished to read. Her days were quiet, predictable, and lonely, but something had changed inside her. The soft ache that used to fill her chest had cooled into stillness, the kind of stillness that comes after a storm when the sea is calm but forever changed. Margaret had stopped waiting for her daughter's call. She stopped checking her phone every few hours, stopped looking out the window hoping to see a familiar car pull into the driveway. There were no more "maybe this week" or "maybe next time." A hope once her greatest strength had now become her greatest burden, and she had finally decided to set it down. One crisp autumn morning, she woke earlier than usual. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. She made herself tea, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, and sat at her kitchen table with a notebook. At the top of the first page, she wrote 3 simple words: "My new beginning." For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She was thinking about what she still had: time, peace, and the chance to reclaim the pieces of herself she had given away. That day, she cleaned out her attic. Dust filled the air as she opened old boxes full of Emily's childhood memories, drawings, birthday cards, school projects. Each item carried its own story, a moment frozen in time. Margaret smiled as she picked up a handmade card that read, "To the best mom in the world." She traced the crooked letters with her finger, feeling both love and sorrow wash over her. Then, one by one, she packed everything neatly into a new box labeled "Past." It wasn't anger, it was release. Later that week, she visited her lawyer, a kind, middle-aged man named Mr. Patterson, who had known her family for years. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Williams?" he asked with a warm smile. Margaret hesitated for a moment before saying quietly, "I'd like to make some changes to my will." He nodded, reaching for his pen. "Of course. What kind of changes?" She took a deep breath. "I want to remove my daughter as my beneficiary," she said calmly. "And instead, I'd like to leave everything to a children's charity, one that helps orphans or struggling mothers, people who still remember what love means." Mr. Patterson looked at her over his glasses, slightly surprised. "Are you sure? That's quite a big decision." "I've never been more sure," Margaret replied softly. "This isn't punishment. It's purpose. I want what I have to mean something to someone who truly needs it." The lawyer nodded slowly. "Then we'll make it happen." As she signed the papers, Margaret felt something powerful, Not revenge in the cruel sense, but justice in the quiet kind. She wasn't taking anything away from her daughter. She was giving it to the world that still valued love, the kind of love she had once given so freely. That night, she slept peacefully for the first time in months. Days turned into weeks. The leaves fell and winter crept in. Margaret began volunteering at a local community center, helping to serve meals to single mothers and children in need. They reminded her of what it meant to be human, to care without expecting anything in return. The more she gave, the lighter she felt. The hole her daughter's absence had left was slowly being filled with kindness. One evening, as she was cleaning up after a community dinner, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Emily. "Hey, Mom, sorry I've been so busy. Things have been crazy lately. How are you?" For a long moment, Margaret just stared at the screen. Months of silence, and now a simple text. She typed and erased her reply 3 times before finally writing, "I'm fine. Sweetheart, I hope you're doing well." It was polite, gentle, but it carried none of the warmth her daughter might have expected. Emily replied a few minutes later, "We should talk soon. I've missed you." Margaret smiled faintly, though her heart didn't stir the way it once would have. She could see through the message, the guilt, the obligation, perhaps even convenience, but not genuine love. That night, she wrote in her journal again, "When someone forgets your worth, the kindest thing you can do is let them." Weeks later, Emily finally called. Her voice was cheerful, almost rehearsed. "I've been meaning to call." "How have you been?" "I'm well," Margaret said softly. Her tone was calm, steady, distant. "I'm sorry about missing your birthday." Emily continued quickly. "Work has been insane lately. I didn't mean to." "It's all right." "Emily," Margaret interrupted gently. "Life gets busy." Emily hesitated, sensing something different in her mother's voice. "Are you sure you're okay?" "You sound different." "I am different," Margaret said simply. "You know, Emily, life has a way of reminding us what we forget, even birthdays." There was a pause on the line, a silence heavy with meaning. Then, softly, Margaret added, "Take care of yourself, dear." And before her daughter could respond, she ended the call. It wasn't anger that guided her hand. It was peace. She had finally stopped chasing what no longer wished to stay. That night, Margaret stood by her window, watching snow fall under the glow of the streetlight. She felt no sadness, no bitterness, only quiet strength. Her revenge was not made of cruelty or words. It was made of silence, the kind that makes others hear their own guilt. She whispered to the cold night air, "You'll understand someday, Emily. Karma always remembers what love forgets." And for the first time, Margaret didn't feel forgotten. She felt free. 3 years had passed since that quiet phone call. Margaret's voice, calm, distant, and strangely peaceful, still echoed in Emily's mind sometimes, but she never lingered on it. She was too busy, too caught up in her world of deadlines, meetings, and social gatherings. To the outside world, Emily seemed to have it all: a successful business, a beautiful home, and a life full of comfort. But behind the flawless photos and smiling captions, small cracks had begun to form. It started with her company. A few wrong investments, a dishonest partner, and a sudden market shift. All at once, everything began to crumble. Contracts were canceled, clients vanished, and her trusted investors backed away. Emily's once bustling office turned cold and quiet. At first, she thought it was temporary, just a rough patch, she told herself, forcing a smile at her reflection each morning. But the patch didn't end. Within months, she was drowning in debt, her phone ringing constantly with demands for payment. Her friends, who once cheered her successes and filled her weekends with parties, began to drift away too. Invitations stopped coming. Messages slowed. When she called, they were too busy or out of town. Even her husband, Michael, grew distant. Arguments filled their home about money, about priorities, about her emotional distance. One evening, after yet another bitter fight, he simply packed his bags and left. "You've forgotten how to care, Emily," he said quietly at the door. "Everything has to be about you, even love." She didn't chase after him. She just stood there, frozen as the door clicked shut. For the first time in her life, silence frightened her. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's once perfect life collapsed piece by piece. The business failed completely, her credit cards maxed out, and she was forced to move into a smaller apartment. One rainy evening, she sat alone on the floor of her living room, surrounded by unopened bills. The sound of the rain hitting the window reminded her of something, a sound she hadn't heard in years. Her mother's voice, gentle and warm. "Don't forget, Emily. What you give to others always finds its way back to you." The memory hit her like a wave. For the first time in years, she thought about that call. Her mother's last words. Life has a way of reminding us what we forget, even birthdays. She suddenly felt the weight of all her forgetfulness. The missed birthdays, the unanswered calls, the unopened letters. The unopened letters. Her heart tightened as she remembered the small box she had received years ago, a birthday gift from her mother. She had tossed it aside, unopened, thinking she'd deal with it later, but later had never come. Emily scrambled to her closet, pulling down boxes, searching desperately until she found it. The small package, slightly crushed, its brown wrapping paper faded. Her hands trembled as she tore it open. Inside was a velvet pouch and a folded note. She opened the note first. "For my dearest Emily, sometimes love doesn't need a special day to be remembered." "Mom," her breath caught in her throat. With trembling fingers, she opened the pouch and found the heart-shaped gold locket. Inside was a tiny photograph, her and her mother smiling, eyes bright full of love, and beneath the photo were engraved 3 small words. "Always. My girl." That was when she broke. Tears streamed down her face, falling onto the locket, the paper, the floor. She sobbed until her chest hurt, until the walls seemed to echo her cries. For years, she had ignored the only person who had loved her without conditions. Now that voice was gone, and her apologies had no place to land. The next morning, Emily decided she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. She packed a small bag and drove for hours through quiet country roads until she reached the old neighborhood she had grown up in. When she turned the corner and saw her mother's little white house, her hands began to shake. The front garden was still well kept, the fence freshly painted. But there was no sign of her mother. She walked up the steps and knocked. No answer. She tried again. Still nothing. A voice behind her said gently, "You looking for Mrs. Williams?" Emily turned to see an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Green, standing by her gate. "Yes," Emily said, her voice trembling. "I'm her daughter." Mrs. Green's expression softened, and for a moment she hesitated. "Oh, sweetheart," she said quietly. "I'm so sorry. Your mother passed away last winter." The world stopped. Emily's breath left her body in one sharp exhale. "What?" she whispered. Green nodded sadly. She went peacefully. "Heart failure, they said. She was a wonderful woman. She used to talk about you, even after, even when she knew you were busy. She said she hoped you were happy." Emily's knees nearly gave out. She leaned against the fence, tears falling freely. "Mrs. Green handed her a small envelope. "She left this with me, said to give it to you if you ever came back." Emily opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a handwritten letter. "My dear Emily, if you are reading this, then maybe life has finally given you the quiet to listen. I don't blame you for forgetting me. Sometimes we all get lost in the noise of living. But I hope one day you'll understand that love is not something we receive. It's something we remember to give. I've left this house to someone who needs it more, a young mother and her son. Don't be sad. I'm free now and I forgive you." Sometimes forgetting someone teaches them to remember forever. Mom. Emily pressed the letter to her heart and cried. The words blurred with her tears, but the message burned deep inside her. Karma had come quietly, not to punish, but to remind. That night, Emily sat on the porch of the empty house, the same porch where her mother once waited for her. She looked up at the stars and whispered through her sobs, "Happy birthday, Mom." The wind stirred gently, brushing against her cheek like a soft hand, and in that moment she finally understood. Some birthdays, once forgotten, return not as celebrations, but as lessons carved into the soul. The sun rose over the small town of Willow Creek, casting a soft golden glow across the quiet streets. The little white house at the corner Margaret Williams's old home looked the same from the outside. White picket fence, rose bushes by the porch, and a wind chime that sang gently in the morning breeze. But the woman who had once waited by that porch was gone. Inside the house, everything had changed. A new family lived there now. A young mother and her boy, both smiling, both safe, both unaware that the warmth they felt in these walls came from a woman they'd never met. Margaret's kindness still lingered, invisible but alive, like sunlight that never truly fades. Across the street, sitting in a parked car, Emily watched them. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with red from sleepless nights. 3 years had passed since she learned of her mother's death, yet the guilt still sat heavy in her chest. An ache that never healed, only softened with time. She came here every year on the same day. Her mother's birthday, the birthday she once forgot. In the passenger seat beside her sat a small vanilla cake, 2 plates. 2 forks. It was a ritual now, a silent apology, a confession, a promise. After a long pause, Emily stepped out of the car, holding the cake carefully in her hands. The autumn wind brushed through her hair as she walked down the narrow path to the cemetery nearby. The crunch of fallen leaves under her shoes was the only sound. When she reached the grave, she knelt slowly, her eyes tracing the words engraved on the cool marble. Margaret Williams, a 1958-2021, she gave love even when the world forgot to return it. Emily's throat tightened. She placed the cake gently on the grass beside the headstone and whispered, "Happy birthday, Mom." Her voice trembled. For a while she just sat there, staring at the stone, remembering everything, the laughter, the hugs, the smell of her mother's baking, the warmth of her voice. And then, inevitably, the silence that had replaced it. "I made vanilla," she said softly, wiping her eyes. "Your favorite, lemon frosting too. You always said the tang made it special." The wind blew softly, rustling the leaves as if to answer her. She lit a single candle and watched the flame dance in the breeze. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for every birthday I missed, for every call I didn't make, for every moment I made you wait." The words came out heavy, choked but true. "I thought I had time," she continued. "I thought you'd always be there, waiting, forgiving, understanding. I forgot that even love runs out of time." Tears fell freely now, tracing lines down her cheeks. She clasped the locket around her neck, the one her mother had sent years ago, the one she had once ignored. She wore it every day now. It rested against her heart like a weight she carried willingly. "I saw the family living in your house," she said after a long pause. "You would have loved them. The little boy reminds me of me. Messy, curious, always talking. You did a good thing, Mom. Even after everything, you were still giving." She smiled through her tears, a small, broken smile. "You were always better than me." A silence fell deep and peaceful. The world around her seemed to slow. The rustle of trees, the soft call of a distant bird, the faint toll of the church bell in the distance. Emily closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I know I can't fix what I did. I can't bring you back. But I promise I'll remember now. Not just your birthday, but your lessons. I'll be the kind of person you wanted me to be. I'll love people the way you loved me." She leaned forward and kissed the cool stones. "I miss you," she whispered, "every single day." Then she sat quietly, watching the candle burn until it melted down to nothing. The flame flickered once, twice, and then went out. But instead of sadness, a calm washed over her, the kind of peace that comes not from forgetting, but from finally remembering. That night, Emily returned home to her small apartment, simpler, quieter, and filled with things that truly mattered. On her desk sat her mother's old journal, the one Mrs. Green had found later among her belongings and mailed to her. Every page was filled with reflections, kindness, lessons, and love, but it was the last entry that Emily always returned to, written just days before her mother's passing. "I've realized that revenge isn't always about hurting those who hurt us. Sometimes the greatest revenge is peace, living with grace when others forget to. If Emily ever reads this, I want her to know I never stopped loving her. I just stopped waiting." Emily read those words again and again, the tears falling silently onto the page. Then, with a faint smile, she closed the books. The next morning, she visited the local community center. the same one her mother had volunteered at in her final years. She signed up to help with meal deliveries for single mothers and children. As she handed out food that afternoon, a little girl tugged on her sleeve and said, "Thank you." Emily knelt down, smiling through watery eyes. "You're welcome, sweetheart." In that moment, she felt her mother's presence, not as a ghost, but as a quiet warmth in her chest, a gentle whisper that said, "Now you understand." That night, Emily baked again. Vanilla cake, lemon frosting, one candle. She placed it by the window and watched it glow in the darkness. She whispered, "Happy birthday, Mom," one last time, and though the world outside was silent, she could almost hear her mother's laughter in the wind. Soft, forgiving, eternal. Because some birthdays, once forgotten, are remembered forever.